college casual show. I forgot to say that, but a little mini episode about Florida State. I meant to put out another episode previewing the week. Didn't get to it though. I'm gonna get to kind of what hard to believe me, but we're gonna get to kind of the games that I called and I just that I kind of predicted what I predicted for this weekend and what actually happened. So we'll get right into it. So for week, a lot of big games. We had Texas. I mean, look at how Texas won that game. That was impressive. I did have Texas covering the spread. I didn't see this though. I didn't see Michigan's offense just laying a dud on the field. So I was covering another big game. Let's see. I did have Oregon not covering the spread. I thought 19.5 was way too generous for Oregon, especially how they played against Idaho the week previous, and then they play Boise State. Boise State should have won the game, by the way. But I knew Oregon wasn't going to cover. I thought they were going to win. I thought it was going to be close. I thought Boise State is a really talented team, and they have talent in the right skill positions. Ashton Jeanty, he could be playing himself in the Heisman Trophy race. We'll talk about that maybe later on in the season if he keeps going at the rate he is. Tennessee, I knew they were going to cover this game. I have not put NC State into my top 25 because I just didn't think they were that talented of a team. Um, Tennessee they could be a dangerous team in the SEC after you watch these past 2 weeks. Nico Emia, Iamaliava, good lord, that is a mouthful. Didn't play as well. He had 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but that team just ran the football really efficiently and just destroyed them. That they were just more talented than NC State. I did not see the Kansas Illinois game happening. I thought Kansas was gonna win. Illinois was a really good defense that game. Shut down Jalen Daniels. Didn't see that game happening. Iowa State. I usually think Iowa's going to win because that's usually what's going to happen in the Cyhawk game. I did not see this happening. I did not see this coming. Even though I knew Iowa State had a good roster, Matt Campbell always has this like 4 year stretch where they're not as good, but then they play that fourth and fifth year where they have all the talent build up. And then they become a good team. I think that is something that could happen this year in the Big 12. I think there could be a dark horse in the Big 12 like years past. There's been times where TCU was looking to be a playoff team, and then they beat him. Iowa State beats them in like I want to say week or no, not week 13, week 11. Um, and they knock off TCU from being able to go to the playoff. And so Iowa State could be that dangerous team in the Big 12. So overall, very surprising week in uh, the in college football. Very surprising. We'll talk about the elephant in the room in a second. It's a pretty big elephant. I mean, it's hard to miss. Um, we'll talk about my last week's top 25. I had So week 2, I didn't have a chance to put this out. So I had Georgia, Ohio State, Texas in my top 3. That hasn't changed for this week. Just a little rearranging. I'll show you. Then Alabama at 4. I think Alabama's just consistent. I don't think they're gonna stay there until the Georgia Alabama game. We'll see how that goes. Notre Dame at 5. Uh, that changes. That changes for week three's top 25. And then we have Ole Miss at 6. Penn State at 7. They played really impressively against West Virginia. I moved them up. I think they were at 10 previously. 8, I have Utah. This one's going to change to the next for this week. I do think Utah is just an overall well-balanced team, but Cam Rising really makes the machine go. Oregon at 9. So they were at 4 for me. I changed them to 9 because that was not an impressive win against Idaho. Their offensive line struggled, which they did also this week against Boise State. If you watch that Boise State game, Boise State was really dialing up blitzes that Dylan Gabriel was not seeing pre-snap, but we'll get to that in a second. And then Missouri at 10, they kind of jumped to me, and then they actually have a ranked matchup this week. Surprising, we did not see that coming. Then Miami at 11, they had a really impressive game against Florida, albeit it was Florida. But then they come out and they beat FM, FMAU, FAM, FAMU, Florida A&M. Then again, it's Florida A&M. So there's 11. Their talent, how they how their talent has really meshed this year has really impressed me. Cam Ward is going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate if he keeps playing this way. I don't doubt that. And then 12, I had USC. I was really impressed with their win against LSU. Their defense was really good. Like a big step up from the LSU or from the year previous. So I was really impressed by that. Michigan went to 13. I had them at, I want to say 9. And then they played Fresno State, and I was not impressed. Obviously, I was proven right that they were not impressive. I had Tennessee at 14. So Tennessee and Oklahoma stayed the same. Arizona stayed relatively the same. So all these teams stayed relatively the same until LSU. They lost. That's a game they probably shouldn't have lost. They let that one game go away. Nebraska, we'll talk about them in a second. I won't get into them too much. Kansas, Iowa, all the same. Boston College really impressed me with the win over Florida State, and then same with Georgia Tech, even though it did lost. And then 25, we have Boise State. Okay, so now we're at week 3. So let's look at this. So I changed Texas and Ohio State, and here's the reason why. Texas has a really impressive win against Michigan, which Ohio State has yet to beat them, but that's from a year ago. But I think Texas having that impressive win just can catapult them. Again, these, as they should be, these rankings should be weekly snapshots of what we see from each team that week, which is why there's a team at number 20 down there. Honestly, I really debated them taking them out of the top 25, but I didn't go there. Ole Miss, so a lot of teams slid up and then a lot of teams slid down because of the upsets. Ole Miss, Missouri, Miami's at 7. I'm really impressed with this team. I made the genuine mistake of predicting Florida State was going to win the ACC. I should have gone with my gut, which my gut was telling me Miami was going to be good this year, and they obviously are going to be good this year because if you look at that schedule, geez, they have Louisville now that's a ranked team. So on their schedule, and Florida State has just not looked good. Penn State at 8. I didn't slide them back too much. I was really debating on doing that. Because of how they played against Bowling Green. They were trailing Bowling Green in the fourth quarter. I think that's cause for concern, but James Franklin, I believe, will clean that up. He needs to clean that up for the USC game, which is coming up soon. Oregon at 9. I also debated on sliding them back, but at 9, I think that's a fine ranking to put them. Oregon, the thing here is they played a good Boise State team, not a great one, and the stuff you saw in week 1 against Idaho that was concerning, you saw it even more. Oregon should have lost that game. If it wasn't for a punt return and a kick return that Oregon gets, Boise State probably wins this game outright. And that's saying something. Ashton Jeanty played super well. And as I said earlier, a couple minutes ago, is the way Oregon cannot pick up a blitz and pick up a delayed blitz is cause for concern because then when they go up to, or when they play Ohio State at home, you're going to realize that their defense, Ohio State's defense is very veteran. They're very good. If they can't pick up a blitz like they couldn't against Boise State, you're going to have an issue because Ohio State has an argument to be the best defense in the country. We'll see that in the next coming weeks. USC, I just slid them up, and that was just a slide up from all the losses. Tennessee, I'm really impressed by them. I really like them as a dark horse in the SEC. Every time, like each week, my playoff predictions are going to crumble, I believe. So we'll see how that goes. And then Utah at 12. With Cam Rising's injury, that's why I slid them down from 8 to 12. Because with Cam Rising, he's what really makes the Utes go and what makes them successful. Every time Cam Rising's been the starting quarterback, they've went and won the conference title. So for me personally, I think that's a cause for concern, though. The throwing hand is a cause for concern for Cam Rising and Kyle Whittingham and the Utes. They need him to be able to go, especially going into the Big 12 conference schedule, where they're definitely going to need him to go. Kansas State, I have him at 13. It was a good win against Tulane, a team in Tulane that could potentially be the Group of 5 team if they beat Kansas State here, but I didn't. Oklahoma, a concerning game where they beat Houston 12 to 16. I kept them at the same place just because a lot of the other teams had similar games. Arizona at 15. They're gonna have a big game against Kansas State this Friday. And then Nebraska at 16. Actually, I'll talk about them right now. Actually, I'll save that off. Okay, then 17. I got Oklahoma State. LSU moved them up a spot. Michigan goes down to 19. Notre Dame goes down to 20. Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois. That's the big headline of the weekend, I would say, besides the Texas-Michigan game. And then we have Boston College at 21. Really impressed by them. Louisville, I finally put them in there, even though they haven't beaten anybody yet. I don't know why the top AP poll loves them so much. They're at 19. I think that's a little. They after week one they beat. I'm trying to think of who they beat, but they beat a team that was completely lesser than them. Then they played Jacksonville State. I'm pretty sure it was Jacksonville State this week, and they beat up on them. I keep thinking to myself, so we're just going to put a team in the top 25 for destroying two weak opponents on their schedule, albeit they destroyed them, they took care of business, but I don't like how we immediately put them in there because of the impressive play against FCS teams. Because as we can see, that could be a little misleading. We'll see later on the season. Iowa State, I have 23. That one against Iowa was impressive. They were down 19-7. They came back against a really good defense. Illinois beats Kansas. They really impressive win for Illinois. And then Syracuse at 25. Kyle McCord beats up on Georgia Tech. At one point, Syracuse was up big against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech almost came back, but to no avail. Syracuse came on top, so they go in my top 25. All right, so that's my week 3 top 25. This is a different top 25. I did not expect this to be it. I definitely expected Notre Dame to stay at number 5, but I'm so glad I didn't record an episode last week because I would have because that would have given me opportunity to bloviate about the win Notre Dame had at Texas A&M. Because that's what everyone was talking about all week was, oh my gosh, did you see the Notre Dame game? They absolutely blew that defense was so impressive against Texas A&M and for Riley Leonard to go into Kyle Field and get the win. I I for me, I thought we needed to wait and see for Notre Dame, obviously, clearly, but I did not see this coming against Northern Illinois. I don't think anybody did. So that's my week 3 top 25. Okay, let's get into the stories of the weekend. Texas, very impressive win against Michigan. Quinn Ewers if he keeps playing the way he is, and how he did against Michigan, which is, by the way, a great defense. The one thing Sark is really good at is taking advantage of teams that have a clear weakness, which Michigan does. And the weakness used to be their biggest strength last year, which is their depth. The defensive line depth, specifically at the defensive line and defensive tackle, the interior defensive line, really set the tone of the game. Because when Mason Graham and Kenneth, I'm trying to think of, it's not Graham. I'm trying to think of the other guy. But when those two interior defensive line, great players, some of the best interior linemen in the country, when they go and sub out and they put in their subs back in, Sark would take that as an advantage to go, okay, let's go with Jaden Blue, let's go with Gaines to get to run inside and gash Michigan from the inside. And then when uh, Wink Martindale puts in the interior or their the first stringers on the defensive line, Sark would say, "All right, you do that. We're going to run to the outside. We're going to run outside zone runs. We're going to play outside." Because what was really apparent to me, especially on the defensive side, is Texas is faster than Michigan, which there's a lot of there are a couple analysts out there that actually made a great comparison for Michigan. Is Michigan reminds them a lot about the early Harbaugh Michigan teams. Team with questionable quarterback, not as great speed on the outside, really just trying to physical it out, trying to wear you down. The one thing with Michigan this year, though, is they can't wear you down because they don't have the depth they did last year. And I think that's where it's going to take Sharon Moore a couple of years to get Michigan competing for a Big Ten title and getting into the playoff. That's why I didn't have Michigan going to the playoff this year, is because they just don't have the depth they did last year. So, although I believe in Sharon Moore, there were a lot of plays where if he subs in Alex Orji, everyone, 110,000 people in the big house, knew exactly what was going to be run, which was a QB run. There was one play where he motions out Donovan Edwards, and Texas is like, "Oh, well, it's obviously going to be a power run for Alex Orji. Why?" It's Sharon Moore had some questionable play calling, which from a year ago he had was one of the best play callers offensively in the country. This game he did not show that, which was disappointing to me. I was hoping Sharon Moore would have something, a wrinkle for Texas that Texas wouldn't expect. Maybe Alex Orji like throws the ball, but with Davis Warren, he's a great story for college football, battling leukemia in high school and then walks on to Michigan, finally gets his opportunity to start. It's just that they don't have the level of dynamic that they can't go vertical like they did last year. JJ McCarthy really helped them go vertical last year, and I think that's what's really missing with Michigan. In part, just losing so many players on the offensive side, and then Texas was just so. Their secondary now. This could be bolstered from what they have played against. They played against Colorado State, and then they've played against Michigan. Two teams that Texas was going to be really good in the secondary. But still, Texas playing as well as they did in the secondary really shows the level of improvement that they had from last year. Because last year Texas had issues in the secondary, which if they shore those up, SEC better watch out, because Texas could beat Georgia in the regular season, and then they play an SEC title game, and they win. They become one of the top seeds in the playoff. So we'll see how that all plays out. Notre Dame, yeah, I talked about them. I mean, that game, their defense is great. The offense, because we saw a bit of the struggles, because going into the middle of the third quarter, Notre Dame was at 6-6 against Texas A&M. And when I'm watching this game, I'm like, there's a lot of offensive struggles, and then they finally exploded with some huge runs from the running backs for Notre Dame. But you got to think to yourself, Notre Dame losing at home. Do we think Notre Dame can make the playoff? Do I think personally? This is where we were supposed to be like, okay, we don't need to pay attention to Notre Dame for the next couple weeks until they play Florida State and Louisville, and then SC. But Notre Dame needs USC to be as impressive as possible. Notre Dame needs USC to play some really good football. They need SC to beat Penn State. They need SC to beat Michigan. They need SC to be close to undefeated or as a one-loss team as possible. They need that. So if SC isn't that if they're, let's say, 8-3 by the time they play Notre Dame, Notre Dame's not getting in the playoff. It's just that's just the way it's going to be. And for the Power Four, specifically the Big Ten and the SEC, that's a sigh of relief. They wanted that like fifth team to be in the playoff, and for the SEC, at least in my top 25, I have five teams in the top six. And we'll see how that plays out. Everyone's probably going to beat each other out of those spots. It's still the early of the season, but interesting week in college football for sure. I want to talk about Nebraska. I told myself I was not going to say anything about Colorado until the Nebraska game, until if they beat Nebraska. And guess what? Colorado did not disappoint me. I thought Nebraska was going to beat Colorado, and I thought they were going to beat them convincingly. I the the issues that Colorado had last year have carried over, and arguably maybe worse, because Nebraska, by the way, is a very talented team. They were one of the best defenses in the Big Ten last year, and if it weren't for horrible quarterback play and just carelessness at the quarterback position, if they had a net positive in terms of turnovers, Nebraska would be at least 8-4, maybe even 9-3. This year with Dylan Royola, he played as well as he could have. There were a couple missed throws that were deep. If he makes those throws, we may be looking at 45-7 or 45-3. Another thing with Nebraska that little concern is that fourth quarter was one of the most sloppiest quarters I've ever seen. Every play, I swear I saw a yellow marker out there. I swear I saw one. There was a flag nearly on every play. A little cause for concern for me personally. But I think for Matt Rule, he's going to be as frustrated as anybody in that locker room that's going to be like, hey guys, we were up 28-0 at half. What the heck happened? We should be winning that game 42-0. We should not have let Shadur even get near the red zone. And Shadur struggled. I mean, ooh, that offensive line was bad. And the defensive line was even worse. Nebraska literally did whatever they wanted to. Running the football, passing the football. The whole arsenal of Nebraska really showed it. And like I said, Matt Rule knows how to turn teams around in year two. He knows how to do it. He's one of the best college coaches in the country, in my opinion, because of how he can turn things around. Turn things around at Temple, turn things around at Baylor. Now he's turning things around in Nebraska. Very early to say that, but now Nebraska has somewhat of an easy path to be 7-0 by the time they play Ohio State. Now, one of the things is maybe a team emerges, like in Illinois. I believe they play them later in the like before they play Ohio State. Yeah, so Nebraska, they play Northern Iowa, Illinois at home. Let's say Illinois wins another one. That may be a ranked matchup that we weren't expecting earlier in the season. So for Nebraska, they got to get through this stretch of games where they're going to be facing one of them, and no one's really going to pay attention to them because they're going to be like, all right, you got to win these games. Don't act like we need to give you any attention until the Ohio State game. Whew, I'm excited for that game. Anyone else, if Ohio State beats Oregon and then they play Nebraska at home, who else is going to be excited? Like, that's going to be a cool game. A freshman quarterback going into the shoe late at night. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a night game. I hope so. Bright lights for Dylan Raiola. Dylan already had that game, but it was at home. And for Dylan Raiola, he played as impressive these past 2 weeks. He's proven why he's a five-star quarterback, why he gets some comparisons to Mahomes. He throws like him, he walks like him, he talks like, not tiny, he doesn't talk like Kermit, but he does everything so similar to Patrick Mahomes. All right, we're gonna let's talk about week three, the week three matchups. So the big one this weekend, I think the headliner for this one this weekend is going to be Arizona State. That's the game we're going to really be looking at. There's not many others that like jump out and tell you, oh, these are big. A lot of teams are on the bye on a bye this week. Um, so for Arizona and Kansas State, this is going to be a big setting the tone for the Big 12 because we're in the as I've said, we're in this era of college football where this year is going to set the precedent of who really owns each conference. And for Arizona, who now joins the Big 12, and for Kansas State, who's been in the Big 12, it's really important that these two teams they figure out who both these teams are here. And this is a very early big game. Arizona goes on the road to Kansas State. Noah Fafita last week they barely edge out. I'm trying to think of who they beat. Excuse me. Yeah, they barely beat Arizona, 22-10. I'm Teteroa McMillan. I think I'm saying that wrong, but had I want to say 3 catches for about 11 yards. That's not good enough to win against Kansas State. They have to. I'm gonna say this. McMillan is going to have a huge game against Kansas State. He's going to have to ball out because also next week, if Cam Rising gets healthy, they have to go on the road to Utah as well, which will be very important for Arizona. This weekend, the stretch. Oh well, they have a bye week in between Kansas State and Utah. I keep forgetting that. But for Arizona, it's very important that they win this game, and then Kansas State they have Arizona, and then they have to travel at BYU, play Oklahoma State. That's a pretty tough stretch of games. And then they have to play at Colorado. So both these teams, very headliner game for the Big 12 to really show that playoff spot for the Big 12 and who can represent the Big 12 in the playoff. Um, then a surprising top 25 matchup. I don't think anybody saw this coming, and either did the networks because obviously SEC network. So not very many people are going to watch this game, but Boston College travels to Missouri. This is going to be interesting. Bill O'Brien had a really impressive game against the Noles, and he had a really impressive game plan. Thomas Castellanos, we talked about him last week, and how impressive he's been. Not only throwing the football, but being the dual threat runner he is, really made Florida State super like undisciplined in gap scheme and gap integrity. So for the Boston College, it's and Bill O'Brien, it's really coming up with a game plan that can take Missouri off their guard, like draw something up that Missouri's not going to expect. I think that's going to be the big thing for Boston College here if they want to get the upset. And for Boston College, if once them beating Florida State, albeit Florida State is now looking like a bottom half team in the ACC, but beating a very talented Florida State has to give you confidence, especially in the fashion they beat them. It was a complete and utter dominance. They should have probably won by more. But Missouri better be aware of Boston College, and I think now that they have a number next to their name and who they beat, I think Missouri is going to take them very seriously. I'll give, I'll give my predictions right now just to make sure I get them out. And I'll make a post about it too. So check. Have the lines come? Have they come out yet? They have not. I'm gonna assume that they're gonna have Kansas State. I'm surprised that ESPN does not have a spread for this game. That's interesting. Um, okay. So I'm gonna pick Kansas State to win this game. Arizona not having a good game against Kansas State, or Arizona not having a good game against Northern Arizona, um, it's a cause for concern, especially at home. But I'm going to take Kansas State. Avery Johnson's a good quarterback. I like him. Also, their 1-2 punch of Giddens and Dylan Edwards, the transfer from Colorado, I think will just be too much. I think Kansas State is a physical team, and Arizona is going to try to air it out. I think that will be the issue for Arizona. They won't be able to control the line of scrimmage. It's a very important piece in college football. So I think that's going to be the big thing. Another headliner game. I skipped over this. They're trying to make it a headliner game. I don't know if it is. I'm moving on from Arizona and Kansas State. I don't know if it is, but it's Alabama, Wisconsin. I don't know if this is going to be as big of a game as Fox is saying it's going to be. Fox has this game. It's going to be noon kickoff. Look, I want to believe this is going to be a good game, but I think Alabama. This is one of those games where it's kind of like Alabama against Duke, where they play them like early on in the season, and it's not close. But Alabama does have to travel to Madison and play Wisconsin, so I think that's probably going to be an advantage to Wisconsin. But I'm going to have Alabama covering the spread. Luke Fickell's a great coach, I believe. I don't think he has it though yet in Wisconsin. He does have Tyler Van Dyke as his quarterback, but Alabama, the way they pulled away against USF, just shows me how explosive this team is and how dangerous this team is in the SEC, and how they really haven't missed a beat. Well, they've definitely missed at least one beat without Nick Saban, but Kalen DeBoer is a great coach, especially a great quarterbacks coach. Kind of like Lincoln Riley. He gets a win. Let's try to look at. I want to try to look at also not non-top 25 games. LSU traveled to not USC, South Carolina, the other USC. USC absolutely destroyed Kentucky. It was 31-6. So I think if you're LSU, you're traveling to Williams-Brice Stadium. This is a trap game. This is a alarm bells being like, okay, we need to pay attention. We need to be uh, um, alert on this game. LSU starts their SEC campaign. All South Carolina started it last week, and they started strong by destroying Kentucky, a team that a lot of people thought were going to be a dangerous team in the SEC. But I'm going to take LSU, but I'm not going to have them covering whatever the spread is. I'm not going to have them covering the spread. I think it's going to be a close game. South Carolina's going to play them close, especially the way they played against Kentucky last week. So I got LSU winning, but not covering. Memphis at Florida State. Ooh, I'm going to say this. Look, if Memphis wins, this is the biggest game in Mike Norvell's tenure at Florida State. And that's saying a lot because Florida State's had some big games. They've played against Oklahoma in a bowl game. They've played against Louisville for the ACC title game. They've played against LSU to open up the season for 2 years in a row. And then they've also played against Georgia in, was it the Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl, whatever bowl it was, whatever New Year's Six Bowl it was. I got thumped. So if for Florida State they're playing at home, I'm not expecting that big of a crowd for Florida State. Or if it is, they're gonna be booing very early. I've got Memphis winning this game. Look, those problems for Florida State, and may make a video on this this week because this is a reoccurring theme in college football. The transfer portal and how it should be used, but how it is used by some programs in the country, and that will key on two teams specifically that have used it and has not worked out for them right now. Anyway, so moving on, Then we got Oregon, Oregon State. I think Oregon blows them out. I have them covering whatever spread they do. They need to prove that they can beat up on teams. Texas A&M goes to Florida. I think A&M is going to win. DJ Lagway was actually really impressive, albeit against Stanford. Graham Mertz should have been benched to start the season. They should have started DJ Lagway, especially how he played against Stanford. He gives them a better shot. He's a younger player. He broke a lot of Texas records. By the way, I live 30 minutes away from him. So there may be some bias there, but I think Florida will play A&M close, but I think Texas A&M wins this game. I, I think Texas A&M with Mike Elko, Florida, it's all coming crumbling down right now for Billy Napier, and I think Texas A&M is going to be a team on the come up. I like Mike Elko as the head coach for A&M. I think he's a good coach coming from Duke. He made Duke a pretty solid program in the ACC, team that you'd have to go through to make the ACC title game. So I like Mike Elko at Texas A&M. I think he's building something pretty good over there. He's got great skill position players, great physical players up front, great defense. I like Texas A&M in this game against Florida. Um, trying to think who else is playing this week. Oh yeah, do I talk about them? Yeah, that's a good question. Screw it, I'll talk about them. So this weekend, Colorado travels to Colorado State, Fort Collins, Colorado. Colorado had a very disappointing weekend, as I stated, but they beat Colorado State this weekend, or last year. Excuse me. This is a must-win game for Deion Sanders because all the issues that have been shown and stated for Colorado, the offensive line, the defensive line, and the fact that how Deion has used the transfer portal. I'll touch into it just a little bit. Deion needs to use the transfer portal not just to build a roster, and that's you can't use the transfer portal for that. There's very different teams in Florida State and Colorado, and then also Clemson. Clemson, the team that just doesn't use the transfer portal at all, and then you have Colorado and Florida State who use it a lot, but they don't reap any benefits. They get benefits of skill position players, but offensive line and defensive line, which really relies on continuity and knowing each other and knowing each other's strengths and knowing each other's tendencies to help fill the void from each player, really has not benefited. Deion Sanders needs more recruits. He needs to get into the high school recruiting game and get those high school recruits to come to his program and really build a program rather than just being a one and done type deal. That's not going to work in college football, um, especially in a conference like the Big 12 where it's really competitive, especially this year. So I'm going to say Colorado wins, but I think it's going to be a close game because of just Shadur is running for his life back there. I want to say he got sacked 6 times. I'm trying to think of how many times he got sacked against Nebraska. It's befuddling me. Let me go to the box score. Thanks, ESPN, for not showing me. I'm so happy. Probably on the defensive box score for him. Yep. Nebraska had 6 sacks against Colorado, um, whereas Colorado had a big giant goose egg against Dylan Raiola. So Colorado cannot rush the quarterback. They can't defend the run. They can't protect their own quarterback. They can't even run the football. They ran it 22 times. and got 16 yards. 16 yards. Let that sink in. 22 carries for 16 yards and less than a yard per carry. Now, to be fair, most of the yards that are taking away are Shadur Sanders sacks. But at the same time, dude, Dion, I hope he changes it around. I'm rooting for Dion to turn Colorado around. And here, it's a successful season if I haven't talked about this all season long, or at least up until this point, and there's a reason for that. But I'm going to finally talk about this. I'm going to talk about Colorado and where they need to aim to be. They need to aim for a bowl game. They need to aim for 6-6, or at the ceiling of 7-5. They don't have the meat and potatoes, or they have the Jimmies and Joes on the outside at the skill positions, but they don't have the guys that really get the job done for you inside, which is what's setting them apart. And so in that case, Colorado has to be, for them to as a successful season, they need to win 6 games. 5 wins is not a big enough jump. Needs to be a 6-win game. For Dion, and he's going to get a lot of flack for this game. I realize this. He's going to get a lot of flack for this game against Nebraska. I personally think he needs to recognize that when you look at the personnel clash against Nebraska and Colorado, Nebraska should have won the game last year because it was close the whole time, and then Colorado pulled away because of turnovers from Nebraska. So that's just my opinion. I think Deion Sanders in Colorado needs to take about 3 to 4 years, and the athletic director shouldn't even bat an eye at Colorado football. You want to know why? Because they were pathetic 1-11 the year previous to Deion Sanders, and then he gets 400% more 400% better in terms of win total. So you either, if you're an athletic director, you either want to be a 1-11, the worst team in FBS, which they were the worst team in the FBS, or you stick with Deion and you trust the process. Now, Deion has to do some soul searching this offseason and actually go after high school recruits. High school recruits that will grow together, that will be a part of a program. The transfer portal is just for players that don't have a home anywhere else, and they didn't have a home back at where they previously were at, or they're trying to find an extra year of eligibility. He shouldn't be building a roster from the transfer portal. It's not sustainable, and we saw that against Nebraska, and we saw that with Florida State against Georgia Tech and Boston College. The transfer portal is not sustainable. Doesn't matter where you get your players from. If you get them from Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, there's a reason why they're transferring, okay? Because they're not getting the touches, or they're just trying to find an extra year eligibility where they're not going to the NFL. So that's my take on Colorado. I don't think this season, if this season is 6-6, I deem it as a successful season for Colorado. I'm sitting here and saying that. And I'm glad they lost to Nebraska in the way they did, because God almighty, I don't want to see the internet blow up about Colorado beating up on North Dakota State. They didn't even beat up on North Dakota State. It was a 1-possession game where North Dakota State was really controlling the line of scrimmage. It's just skill position players can influence a game, sometimes a lot. But when then you play against a team like Nebraska that can control the line of scrimmage really, really well. By the way, Nebraska has the personnel to go up against Ohio State. Not a lot of people want to talk about that. Be like, oh, you're crazy. No. I think Nebraska if they go into that game against Ohio State 7-0, watch out. But anyway, I digress. Colorado played a really good Nebraska team. A really good Nebraska team that's growing and evolving. And that was just a tough out. Now they have to play Colorado State, then they play Baylor, and then they play at UCF. They have 3 games to turn it around and be 4-1. If they're 4-1 by the time they play Kansas State, and they play them competitively, I don't think it's going to happen. But they could play against at Arizona, which is a very similar developed team. Arizona just has better players up front. If they go up to those 2 games and they are competitive, that's success for Colorado. They need to be competitive in these games. They needed to be competitive against Nebraska. They just weren't, because Nebraska just had better personnel. So yeah, that's my take. I knew I wasn't going to talk about Colorado until after this game because I didn't want to give them a single inch of hype. Wasn't going to rank them in my top 25. They aren't even near it. Look, I don't want to be negative, but it's just at some point in time, we have to be realistic in the fact that, look, Deion's a great recruiter. He can get players to come to his program. He just needs to get the right players. A lot like what Nick Saban said. He said, you can use the transfer portal as much as you want, but if you don't get the right players, you'll be shit out of luck. He's absolutely right on that statement. Said that on College Game Day. It's pretty funny. But Nick Saban's absolutely right on that sentiment for the transfer portal. You could pay $20 million for your players, which is exactly probably what Colorado's paying for Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and even his other son, Shadlow, and Jimmy Horn, all the skill position players, probably paying about, I want to say $10 to $15 million, probably, and it's all coming from Deion's pocket, by the way. It's true. I think he said that before. Is a lot of the stuff is coming from his pocket, same as what it was coming from Jacksonville or Jackson State. Is it Jackson State or is it Jackson State? Yeah, it's Jackson State. Anyway, that's this week. We'll be back for next week. I think next week is a bigger week in college football. I hope so, because there's always one week in college football where it's just kind of like, we don't have a big headliner game. This is kind of that week where we just we have like so much chaos in week 1 and week 2, and we're like, oh my gosh, college football is back, and then week 3 is kind of like a step back. We're kind of like, but we still want to watch. We're still gonna watch. Week 4, we'll get to that because there's some big games on the schedule. We got big games: Tennessee, Oklahoma, Utah, Oklahoma State. I'm really excited. USC, Michigan. Oh, that game is I don't want to say an old rivalry game, but it's like kind of like a conjoined rivalry game because Michigan, Notre Dame, USC. Maybe this becomes a rivalry in the Big Ten. Anyway, this has been episode, I want to say 4, 5, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that, 5 probably. I don't know. We'll see. All right. See y'all for the next episode. It might be coming out this week for talking about the transfer portal. Yeah, it's gonna be talking about the transfer portal. Yeah.